I Hate the News is the weekly news bulletin from I Hate Politics podcast, a show about a human activity we love to hate. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. It's July 22nd, 2025. Maryland begins to figure out the impact of the Federal Budget Reconciliation Act, especially in healthcare. File that under could have been worse because state leaders are backing off from a fall special session of the General Assembly they thought was inevitable. After years of trying to enable a pilot program that makes Montgomery County a retail energy supplier, finally there's a bill in front of the County Council which this week is also considering the political blockbuster bill to allow duplexes and triplexes to be built in single-family zoned neighborhoods. Trayon wins the D.C. Ward 8 special elections despite being under indictment for bribery charges and more. Stay with us.
I Hate Politics is brought to you by the Political Science Program at UMBC Shady Grove, where you'll learn a strong foundation in public policy, pre-law, and international affairs for an impactful career in a number of essential areas. Learn more at shadygrove.umbc.edu.
I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are messy, dirty, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians. But no matter how much we may hate politics, we are never exempt from it, even when we refuse to participate. In fact, the purpose of politics is to keep society moving precisely when we don't agree with each other, like now. Music for this episode comes from CatScan, an art pop rock band from Washington, D.C. Paul Chaperas on bass, Kevin Kingsley on guitars and saxophone, and Mason Shelby on synths and percussion. The songs we use in this episode are instrumental versions of songs they wrote for their latest album, Everything is Normal. You can find where they are playing on their Facebook and Instagram pages. The so-called One Big Beautiful Bill passed, and states are now assessing impact. In Maryland, which has been a leader in expanding healthcare insurance, the effects are going to be significant, but not immediate. Vinnie DeMarco is the executive director of Maryland Healthcare for All.
It could have been much, much worse. When the legislators were talking about special session, they feared a specific dramatic cut in federal funding for Medicaid. Around the match that the federal government pays. Under the Affordable Care Act, adults on Medicaid, 90% of the money for it comes from the federal government. It's a 90% match, 10% from the states. That makes it affordable for states. There was a series proposal by very conservative right-wing senators and members of the House to change that to 50%. That would have been billions, immediate cut to Medicaid in Maryland and in every other state. A real immediate disaster. That was proposed, it was rejected, luckily. Had that happened, a special session would have been critically needed to determine what we could have done, which would have been a disaster for many, many, many Marylanders right away. Without that, the changes that are in this bill are bad, but they're more long-term and they're less onerous. Let me just back up by making sure your listeners realize how effective Medicaid, the Affordable Care Act, private insurance under the Affordable Care Act has been. Because these laws passed, and because Maryland implemented them between 2011 and the present, the number of uninsured in Maryland dropped from 13% to 6%. And over 400,000 people got healthcare coverage. That has saved thousands of lives and made so many lives better. We see evidence of fewer hospital visits, better health outcomes, better financial outcomes, and we all benefited. We did a study that showed going from 13% uninsured to 6% reduced uncompensated hospital care by over $460 million. That $460 million, had it been charged to those hospitals, would have gone directly into our premiums, making them higher. This big bad bill that Trump signed takes us backwards, not as bad as what we were fearing. The change in the match from 90% to 50%, which would have really demolished Medicaid coverage for many people. But what they decided to do, since they couldn't get that passed, they tried to undermine the Affordable Care Act in what I would call a sneaky way. And there are two main provisions that undermine Medicaid coverage. One is requiring people to re-up every 6 months instead of every year. The state estimates that 175,000 Marylanders will lose their Medicaid coverage, some part of that because of this renewal. The other major thing is a so-called work requirement. A couple states have tried it and it has not gone well. Most of the people on Medicaid already work. This just puts more burden on them to report things and more burden on the state to keep track of it. But that doesn't take effect till the end of December 2026. Some people think because they wanted it to be after the midterms. And there is a way for the state to get a waiver for that to be delayed another couple of years. A third thing they put in there's a provision in the law now that says if you're not insured and you go to the hospital and you're eligible for Medicaid and you get enrolled at the hospital, it will cover 3 months back of retroactive medical bills. They changed that to 1 month, not related to Medicaid, but related to Affordable Care Act plans that are for people above the Medicaid level. So 138% of poverty, about 21,000. Above that, you go on the Affordable Care Act plans with subsidies. One of the great things that Joe Biden's Inflation Reduction Act did was put additional subsidies for people on Affordable Care Act plans. That was called the Advanced Premium Tax Credits. Those Advanced Premium Tax Credits have helped 70,000 Marylanders get their health care coverage. That additional subsidies are set to expire the end of December of this year. They were not renewed as part of the big bad bill. There are still efforts to renew them. I was just reading an article just as right before going on the show about how the Republicans want to do some stuff related to pharmaceutical benefit managers and things like that. And the Democrats say, we're not going to do that, help you do that unless you keep these subsidies. 70,000 people will likely lose their health care coverage in addition to the 175,000.
Let's talk about the things that you are looking for the state of Maryland to do in order to mitigate this problem.
We have a great law that we got enacted in 2019. Governor Hogan signed it, called Easy Enrollment. That law provides that at tax time, all of us, you and me and everybody who pays his taxes or gets tax credits, fills out tax forms, is asked, are you uninsured? If you answer yes, you're asked a second question. Can we, the state, use this information you've given us in your tax forms to get you enrolled? We also set up a measure at unemployment insurance time. So when you lose your job, you're asked now, thanks to this new law, you're asked, are you uninsured now? If you're uninsured, check the box, check both boxes, and we can get you enrolled. So that's number one, use easy enrollment. Second point is Prescription Drug Affordability Board, which is about to take action, make high-cost drugs more affordable to state and local governments. Next year, we'll be able to make them affordable for everyone. And that will help reduce the cost on our system and individuals. Number three are two bills that passed this year. One creates something called a Health Insurance Coverage Protection Commission. That is charged with examining administrative and legislative solutions. Another bill authorizes the exchange to reduce the number of people who will lose healthcare coverage. We have this assessment on insurance premiums that's been in place since 2018. It's a big tax signed by Governor Larry Hogan, and it is raising money which pays for the reinsurance program, which keeps a lot of premiums down.
For the 70,000 people, losing the premium tax credit is going to be about what, 140?
140 million, yeah.
So it's enough money there now?
Well, that's a good question. What the exchange is going to have to do is rearrange how that money's spent in a way to mitigate the problem if the subsidy doesn't get renewed.
Vinny DiMarco, thank you and good luck.
Thank you for having me.
The Maryland General Assembly now has a joint federal action oversight committee comprising chamber leadership and committee chairs in the State House, which is trying to keep track of the impacts comprehensively. Mark Corman, the chair of the House Environment and Transportation Committee, sits on that body and joined us to talk about the Budget Reconciliation Act.
There are things in here that are beneficial for Marylanders. For example, changes to the state and local tax deduction at the federal level, allowing a higher write-off of taxes. That's good for Marylanders, or many Marylanders. Obviously, not all Marylanders will benefit from that, but those that do, that's a good thing. But there's a lot in here that is really very concerning. I think the two biggest categories of concern involve Medicaid and what we now call supplemental nutritional assistance programs. You and I, Sunil, are old enough to remember when this was called food stamps, and that's food aid for those who can least support it. And what they're doing is twofold. One, they are shifting more of the cost to the states, and then they're also reducing the eligibility for these programs.
Now, in terms of the actual fiscal impact, the disenrollments will benefit the state in a sense that they'll have to pay less. It's bad for the people that lose the insurance, but from a state fiscal point of view, are you a little bit less concerned now because the clarity that you have?
Right. So on just this bill, if you treat things as static, right, so assume no response from us to try to do something for these people who are being adversely affected, the short-term effect is relatively small, right, because a lot of these things have a delayed effective date. The Department of Legislative Services calculated something like a $400+ million annual increased cost in kind of the out year. So that's not this current fiscal year. I don't think that's next current fiscal year, but the years beyond that. Now, obviously, that number is very uncertain and makes a lot of sort of assumptions about the static nature of things. As you know, we're dealing with another situation that can have a big effect on all this, which is changes to the federal job market and the contracting market, which Maryland is obviously heavily dependent on. And changes there will, one, affect our tax revenue, right? So that's an issue for the state's ability to pay for things. But two, might affect the number of people who need these programs and services, right? When we have a recession, it tends to be the case that the Medicaid rolls and the SNAP rolls go up. They don't go down.
Do you see any impacts on transportation, environment, which are directly impacting your committee?
Actually, one of the shortest term policy changes in this bill is ending the zero emission vehicle tax credit at the federal level. That is going to have an effect on the adoption of zero emission vehicles. The history kind of shows actually that the state tax credit, which is a lot smaller, doesn't have a huge impact on adoption rates, but the federal tax credit does. They're also phasing out a number of Inflation Reduction Act related energy financing, clean energy financing credits, which, there are some projections that show that could lead to a double-digit increase in our electricity prices.
The Attorney General made a presentation to the committee as well, talking about all the cases he's filed against the Trump administration. But you said that there were two cases in particular that Maryland has not joined. What are these?
One of the cases involved White House's use of its tariff authority, where Congress, so the legislative branch, has sort of ceded all control over trade and tariff policy. And then again, going back to my corner of the universe, there's litigation around California's Clean Air Act waiver system, which is what has allowed them to set up the California Clean Cars program, which is the zero emission vehicle transition glide path that Maryland has been on.
Attorney General Brown responded to you saying that he's not comfortable talking about this in a public forum. What do you think is going on?
It was interesting just to hear the Attorney General describe that, yes, he has that authority, but it doesn't really work to join these suits if you don't have sort of the full cooperation of the various state departments and agencies. And it makes some sense. I mean, if you're trying to, claim that there's a damage to the state of the I'll use the education funding lawsuit, which Maryland did join. It's really helpful to have the Maryland State Department of Education providing the statistics about what dollars and cents the state is losing out on.
Which makes the tariff non-involvement interesting, right? Because surely Maryland companies are impacted by tariffs.
Yeah, and I think a significant economic driver for the state. We don't think about it much, our way, Sunil, but the Port of Baltimore is actually a huge economic driver for the state and obviously is very dependent on inflows and outflows of trade. So,
You also asked about what would happen if the Trump administration federalized the Maryland National Guard.
like the other agencies of state government, the military department does have an assistant attorney general assigned to it, but they also have a military chain of command. To be continued on that. I'm not sure we got a full, great, robust answer. I did find some comfort that at least he seems to have thought about it and given some consideration to it. But I think that bears a little bit more.
During the session in 2025, there was a lot of talk about there being a fall special session, and that is looking less and less likely.
The big ugly bill and what's going on with the federal job market are ticking time bombs for the state of Maryland, but they're not, immediately exploding hand grenades that have been rolled into the tent, right? And so we can act with a little bit more deliberation, I think. Events could change that, right? When we get our fiscal closeout report in, late August, early September, that might show a much quickly, worsening fiscal picture that requires more attention. But remember, the governor and then the Board of Public Works have a lot of tools to deal with smaller scale fiscal impacts, right? They have a lot of ability to manage the budget to make sure it stays in balance.
The decision is really whether you want to expand Maryland programs or not, because as it stands fiscally, you're, not such a bad place.
Right. And so we don't have an immediate fiscal problem. We probably have some long-term, fiscal problems. And some of those predate the Trump administration, but they have really put their thumb on the scale of disrupting Maryland's economy and livelihood. There are definitely, though, long-term impacts to Marylanders, right? Again, it's not just dollars on a balance sheet. It's about how these programs affect Marylanders. And I think we need to be deliberate in how we try to respond to that.
Much broader comparative question, which is, how is Maryland doing, in your view, relative to other states? So, Virginia, I know it's a Republican state, but fairly purple, North Carolina, other states that are in the same situation.
Virginia is not a Republican state. It might have a Republican governor, but I would say it's a light shade of blue, maybe a little purple. In North Carolina, though, that is more of a purple state, right? That's a state Barack Obama won and it has a Democratic governor, but clearly has, deep Republican roots in it. And I think you saw a Republican U.S. senator decide he wasn't running for re-election because of what was going to happen to his state because of these healthcare cuts. So I think a lot of states are going to feel this very severely. I think something like 40 states ultimately did the Medicaid expansion, some of them kicking and screaming. So I think a lot of states are going to be hit very hard by this. I think a lot of those states that might be more red trending don't want to sort of acknowledge this out loud because they don't want to anger the king. Blue states like Maryland, New York, Massachusetts, Washington State, Oregon, Illinois, we're a little bit more willing to be honest about the negative impacts this is going to have. But I think all the states are going to feel negative impacts.
Mark Corman, thank you.
Thanks for having me back on.
In Montgomery County, the county council finally has a bill that will allow the county government to serve as a retail energy supplier. Electricity deregulation in the state allowed independent retail suppliers to sell energy to ratepayers and be paid through the utilities. But these were private companies. In 2021, District 20 delegate Lorik Cherkudian was able to pass enabling legislation to allow Montgomery County to pilot a new approach, allowing the county government to become another retail supplier in the electricity market in the hope of harnessing bargaining advantages and passing through lower rates to consumers, especially for buying renewably generated power. Here she explains the bill.
The basic idea is when a county or a municipality joins together and has the ability to automatically enroll everybody, in the case of the county, 1 million people, automatically enrolling all of those people into a particular energy supplier. So poles and wires are always going to be the monopoly utility, BG&E, Pepco, but the supply, as folks may know if they've been following the debate around retail supply, can be either the default supply that the utilities provide, or it can be a retail supplier, one of these other companies. In our competitive retail supply arena, the problem has been that the retail supply model has been pick off one customer at a time. And really, in order to make money that way, it's very hard for them to have a price that consistently and significantly below the standard offer service, the default that the utility supplies. But if Montgomery County can negotiate on behalf of 300,000 households with a supplier, there's much more likely that they are going to be able to get a much lower price and a higher level of content of clean energy. So the idea is that the county would be able to get better prices, get more clean energy, and it also allows the county to own its own energy and for the county's own energy to supply clean energy to its own residents. So right now, the law is essentially that the county can own energy, but only to supply to its own county buildings. With a CCE or CCA, both of them are used, community choice aggregation, community choice energy. With that model, the county can procure through contracts with third-party suppliers and can own its own energy that would supply its own residents. It's a way of democratizing energy.
There is a case that when the government participates, as you just described, in the marketplace, then it displaces private enterprise. And that's an argument on the right, obviously, but it is a powerful argument that is made, and Supreme Court and others have backed that position. Do you have any thoughts about going down that path means?
The bill that I passed in 2021, the original bill actually was authorizing community choice aggregation across the state. So any local government, municipal, county, that became very difficult to pass. The utilities fought it hard. Interestingly enough, the third-party suppliers fought it hard. And I actually, if I could just, I want to take a minute to explain that because, and then I'll come back and I'll answer your question. The third-party suppliers fought it hard. And I thought, and I had multiple conversations with them. And I said, you could get a contract for, 300,000 homes. You could get a contract for 20,000 homes. You get that all at once. You could, why wouldn't you want that? Right now you're going door to door. Why wouldn't you want this? And, they had hem and haw and say different things. Finally, one of them in my office privately said, well, we find in the states that have community choice energy, just the price comes down so much, it's hard to make a profit. We don't have a free market. Free market requires perfect information or close to perfect information. Most consumers don't have perfect information when they're making energy choices. And the externalities, if you get it wrong and your energy gets cut off, the impact to your family is really significant, less so, if the shirt that you just bought at the store, doesn't turn out to, be good material or something. So in the retail market, essentially what has been happening is it's not a free market. It is the companies who are able to take advantage of good marketing that they're doing and the lack of perfect information on consumers have been able to make a profit. And so when she said to me, in the CCE states, we're not able to make the same kind of profit. The price comes down so much. I was like, perfect. You've just convinced me that I really need to pass this bill.
So that's analogous to, Medicare and Medicaid negotiating drug prices.
It is similar in the sense that you're sort of still using a market, but you're making it more fair.
The federal government is obviously rolling back renewable energy credits. To what extent do you think that'll impact this project?
The federal government is rolling back tax credits. We still at this point have renewable energy credits, which are RECs and SRECs in the state. That's an important part of the marketplace. The bottom line is for everybody, whether you're in a CCE, have a competitive supplier, use the standard offer service, your energy bills are going to go up because of the passage of the big, beautiful bill. That's just the bottom line. It doesn't matter if you want clean energy or not, that's going to happen. I think then with that, clean energy by itself also becomes harder to build, but you're really facing...
But also becomes price competitive, right? Because if energy prices are going up...
Yes, it is.
The county can opt people in automatically?
Yes. So it's an opt-out.
So it's an opt-out. So I will be moved to community choice energy And then if I do not want it and want to go back to standard up service, then I have to opt out of it.
That's correct. Yeah. So what happens is if you have to engage with a third party supplier, right? You put your bid out and the supplier comes back and says, here's the pricing that we could offer. If you have an opt in and you have the projected data of who's likely to opt in, and let's just say it's 10% or 20%, the suppliers are going to come in with a much higher price. Whereas if you can, and then you're coming in with a higher price and trying to get people to opt into it. Whereas if you have opt out, you go to the supplier, you say, we have 300,000 households. Let's assume that 25% of them opt out. So we're talking about, 225,000 households. What price could you give us? So now you come in with a much lower price, and not only are the 75% likely to stay in, you're probably going to get even more of that 25%. So that is the tool that really makes the difference on pricing.
Sure. The problem with that is if you're a retail choice energy supplier, you can go to the court and make the argument that the government has now created itself an enterprise and it's favoring itself by giving itself the opt out instead of an opt in, and everybody else in the marketplace has to opt in, but the government entity that does this now only have an opt out.
So we have precedent across this country for this model that we have here. There's and I'm sorry, I don't know, it might be like 11 or 12 other states. There's a number of states that have authorization for community choice energy.
That's right, they do. What is your expectation of the impact that this is going to have?
Montgomery County has not been specifically modeled anywhere. The debate and the trade-offs in that are going to be made by elected officials in Montgomery County with participation from Montgomery County residents. So what you see in different CCEs across the country often is they have one default number. So let's say, if the state is at 40% clean energy, the default is 50%, and it's a price that's lower than standard offer service. And then people can opt up to 100% clean energy, for example, at a price. And so generally you're trying to sort of protect consumers and get more clean energy. And then over time, the county will be able to build more clean energy, potentially build storage.
Lorik Cherkoudian, good luck bringing the government back in.
Oh, I already did my part.
Thank you. This week, Montgomery County Council also considers the missing middle housing bill, which would allow duplexes and triplexes to be built in single-family zone neighborhoods. The law, as it stands, does not allow multiple units in the same building in single-family zoned areas. Building more homes on the same land is expected to help make housing more affordable. Many existing homeowners have opposed the move, arguing that it will destroy communities, put pressure on roads and schools, while not helping affordability. Given construction costs, new homes tend to be more expensive, even if they are smaller. And there is political tension between those who want to open new areas for multifamily housing and those who want to maintain the character of the neighborhood. In Washington, D.C., former council member from Ward 8, Trayon White, who was indicted for bribery and since removed from the D.C. Council by his colleagues, won a low turnout election, putting the council in a pickle. Reseat him or ignore the verdict of voters. Marcus Batchelor is a former Ward 8 candidate and now works for the nonprofit People for the American Way.
Even as you see kind of some of the results after the fact, mail-in ballots, things like that, begin to trickle in, that gap for Councilmember White, now Councilmember-elect White, is going to hold, but it's going to be a very narrow election with the second place finisher coming within 200 votes. And then really the the challengers coming within 100 to 200 votes of one another. Yeah, what it means, I think, in terms of the future for Ward 8's leadership, I think the result is leaving more questions than answers for us. Obviously, we don't know what the council is going to do in terms of like their prerogative, right? Their very clear prerogative to expel the council member again for the same violations of the rules that made him ineligible in their view to serve in the first place. I think there's also this really prevalent argument, both from supporters of the council member, but quite frankly, from residents of Ward 8 who are just tired of the cycle of, back and forth, and quite frankly, of not having a voice at the table during these very important deliberations, that the council should just let it sit. And then there's also the legal aspect of all of this. The council member has not gone to trial for the crimes he's been accused of yet, which means that at the same time that he's serving, he will be preparing and appearing in pretrial procedures for his legal case. And so all of these questions about leadership and what we should expect from our leaders is a really open question, despite kind of the definitive nature of the election.
Before we go forward, maybe explain the circumstances under which Councilmember Trayon White was removed from Washington, D.C. City Council.
About a year ago, the Federal Bureau of Investigations revealed that they were charging the council member in connection with an investigation related to embezzlement and bribery in relation to programs run through the district government towards violence interruption and mental health recovery in a sting operation that the FBI conducted over the course of several months. Apparently, the council member, according to photos in the affidavit, is caught on video arranging a bribe. He's been charged with these crimes. He's appeared initially before a judge after being arrested. He's been released. He's at a trial schedule, but it's not scheduled to start until January of 2026. But his colleagues on the council thought that what they thought were very credible accusations was a bridge too far, and that they thought he couldn't effectively serve alongside him or have the authority that he has. And so they decided to use their authority to expel him, which they did early this year. That triggered a special election being called, which according to district law, because the council member has not been convicted of a crime he was eligible to run in, he did alongside three other challengers. And in this special election last week, he came out on top in a very narrow race, each of the four candidates getting about a quarter of the vote.
Does Trayon White argue that these charges against him are political and vindictive? Is that his argument?
Yeah, I mean, to the extent to which we get a statement from the council member on it, obviously he's saying because it's an open investigation, there's a lot he can't say about it. But he has said that he is not guilty of the crimes he's being accused of. On a meeting over the weekend, he talked about if this was true, that they would have caught this by now. And obviously, it was politically motivated, and that he looks forward to the opportunity to vindicate himself. But in terms of the details of kind of what happened, right, in terms of directly refuting the evidence, we haven't had any of that. And his supporters say that, he deserves his day in court before the council took or takes further any adverse action.
This was a Biden administration FBI and not a Trump administration FBI, just to be clear.
Right.
So where does the political motivation come from?
If you follow DC politics, there is a very prominent strain historically of federal targeting of the local DC government, but also more broadly, I think this very long strain of the Federal Bureau targeting Black political leaders. And I think for better or worse, the council members pull in on that very dark and very real history, right? I think, there are political leaders, both elected leaders, but also movement leaders who have been deliberately targeted and assassinated, and, their characters maligned at the direction of the Federal Bureau of Investigations. Whether this rises to that level of conspiracy, I'm personally skeptical. And I think, as you saw, a majority of the voters who voted in this special election are skeptical of that argument.
Shades of Marion Barry or Donald Trump?
Right. Yeah, exactly. I think probably a mix of both is what he's pulling on.
Now, the number of people that came out for the special elections really not that many. What was the total turnout like?
Somewhere north of 7,000 votes. So about 14% of the electorate, which is obviously by most standards low, but in terms of historical turnout, pretty on par with typical, primary elections. Yeah.
The counting is over, or they are still counting?
I think they give voters who sent their ballots in by mail and have them postmarked by election day about a week to get those in, and then they'll close out the counting. But the election is not set to be certified until about the second week of August. And
Trayon White just got, of the 7,000 odd votes, he got just over 2,000?
Just over 2,000, yep.
That seems like a really small number to win a really important office.
It is a very low turnout. And I think despite all of these interventions that we've had, whether it was the introduction of mail-in voting during the pandemic, or even ways to diversify the pool of candidates like public financing for elections, what we're seeing is that in some sections of the city, especially sections of the city that have historically been left out, right? Disenfranchised, disinvested. Their belief that politics can work for them, or that it'll work in the way they want to, is muted a little bit. And unfortunately, right, in an election like this with a four-way split, it's hard to make the argument to at least 75% of voters right, that's not the case. But that's also why I've been an advocate for things like ranked choice voting, which the council is committed to funding and implementing in 2026. So it could be that this was the last plurality election we had in DC, and ranked choice. And in a ranked choice election, obviously, this race would have been very different.
Do you think Trayon White would not have prevailed?
Despite the council members' kind of perceived incumbency, 75% of the electorate voted for somebody else, that more than likely, at least a large swath of those voters probably wouldn't have chosen him as their second or maybe even third choice.
Why didn't the three other candidates who seem to have split the anti-Trayon White vote, why didn't they just consolidate and just one person run?
That's always the classic Monday morning question after the game. There were very active efforts here in Ward 8 to consolidate the field. The field was larger when the special election was first announced. And so 4 candidates out of what I think topped close to 15 is solid.
Marcus Batchelor, thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
That's all for this episode. Be sure to check out our feature interview series that come out Friday mornings. I Hate Politics is produced by me, Sunil Dasgupta, with support from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I direct UMBC's political science program at the universities at Shady Grove in Montgomery County, where, among other things, we explore and learn about politics, government, and society close to home. Music for this episode comes from CatScan, an art pop rock band from Washington, D.C. Paul Chaperas on bass, Kevin Kingsley on guitars and saxophone, and Mason Shelby on synthesizers and percussion. The songs we use in this episode are instrumental versions of songs they wrote for their latest album, Everything is Normal. You can find out where they are playing on their Facebook and Instagram pages. If you want to share your music on the show or know someone else who might want to, please email us at producer@ihppod.org. I hope you'll subscribe and share the podcast as we bring you stories about politics close to you and to your home. See you next time.